My name is Jim Plume. I'm kicking off this presentation. There are a few of us who were involved in activities at the summit, buildingSMART Summit in Tokyo in 2018, and we're each going to present some of our work. My main involvement with buildingSMART International, I think many of you know, is I'm on the steering committee of the infrastructure room, and I'm involved in a couple of the projects or activities of the infrastructure room, which I'll mention in passing as we go along. So I'm fairly heavily involved in some of the current activity, and so I can explain that from an insider's point of view. So I was going to start working through my slides. Page down. It's not working. Ah, there you go. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the current IFC extension work that's going on in the realm of infrastructure. This work has been going on now for the last year and a half, and we're aiming to get most of it done by the end of this coming year, 2019, although I fear that it will flow into 2020. But we want to get the extensions for infrastructure finalized and standardized from the buildingSMART perspective by early 2020. We've been calling that IFC 5, but that's possibly a misnomer. We probably, it's really just the extensions for infrastructure, and whether we ultimately call that IFC 5 is probably still a bit uncertain at the moment. But we've got projects currently running in the domain of rail, road, bridge, tunnel. On this slide it's called maritime, which is now called ports and waterways. And there's a project that's in the wind at the moment on site landscape and urban planning. And that will also get rolled into this set, assuming it gets adequate funding and comes on board. So, and if you look in this slide, these each of these projects, most of which are to do with linear infrastructure, are built on existing work that's been developed by IFC, by buildingSMART in IFC. So there's the IFC 4 survey, IFC alignment, the extensions to IFC to handle the definition and alignment along which a road or a railway follows, a route, if you like. And also the work of the overall architecture project, which was completed at the end of last year and forms a foundation for this work. Across each of those vertical projects is what we call the Common Schema project, and I have the dubious pleasure of being the leader of that Common Schema project. What we're seeking to do there is to identify all of the things that are common across those domains. And so things we've looked at the moment are things like Geotechnics and Earthworks, which almost all of these infrastructure domains rely on. And so rather than deal with those separately in each domain, we're dealing with them under one umbrella called the Common Schema project. So this is where the projects sit at the moment. We're at the end of 2018, vertical red line. The IFC Bridge project began at the beginning of 2017, and it's almost completed. It will be delivering its final schema chain extension proposals early in the new year. Most of the other projects, including Common Schema, began at the beginning of 2018, roughly. They got off to a slightly slow start, but they're progressing steadily now. And as I said, we're aiming to complete all those by the end of 2019. The tunnel project, so Common Schema, rail, road, and ports and waterways are all well underway. And the IFC tunnel project is going to begin hopefully in the new year. Rather belatedly, it's been a bit of a struggle to get it going. And the alignment, the last one I've shown there is the alignment deployment project, which was completed beginning early 2018. It was a good example of how we engage with software vendors to test the extensions as we go along. So once the alignment extensions were developed, we then went through a deployment phase. The problem we're always having with these extensions is that there's always a lag, which I know is very frustrating for all of us, between when the extensions are defined by buildingSMART and when they eventually become an ISO standard, but more significantly for most of us, when they become implemented in software. And so we're still waiting for software implementation, even for IFC 4. And so the work we're doing at the moment there's a fear that it will take a long time before it becomes actually implemented in software. So we're trying to address that by including a deployment phase within these projects. So towards the middle to the end of 2019, we'll be actively seeking to work with significant software vendors to start testing some of the extension ideas that we've developed. And so that's really the status of all of these items. Most of them were, although all reported in terms of their status at the Tokyo Summit. We don't have time here to go into all of the details, but most of them, rail, road, and ports and waterways, are well and truly now at the point where they've defined all their user requirements. The biggest challenge we have at the moment is how to discover what the precise demands or expected needs are for the common schema project. So we made a decision in Tokyo to have a workshop, face-to-face workshop in January, and that's going to occur in Helsinki in the middle of January, where we are endeavoring to sit down for a day and a half and really get our teeth into defining what the common schema elements are, so that we can work studiously over 2019 to get those embedded in the extension. So that's really where we're sitting at the moment, and those projects are going, I think, well, they're going strongly. We're always in need of support, but they are actually progressing. So that leads me to my next slide, which is ways that you can get involved. There are really two ways. The first, and is the least expensive way, which is through the expert panels. And as the projects progress, international webinars, a bit like this, are held to report proposals and outcomes and to seek feedback. And those webinars are advertised through the buildingSMART International website. And I encourage you to get involved in those, follow the work as it goes along, track the work on the website. And if you have any expertise in any of the domains that are being reported on, then you can register. You don't need to be a member of buildingSMART, either international or Australasia. Anyone who has an interest and is willing to give their time to give feedback can get involved. An expert panel typically runs for an hour and a half, and there's documentation associated with it, and there's an opportunity to ask questions during the expert panel, but also opportunity afterwards to provide written feedback and commentary. So, for example, we've been doing some work on Earthworks, as I mentioned before, in the Common Schema project, and we had an expert panel last Wednesday with about 50 participants from all around the world, and that was reasonably successful. And some people on this call actually took part in that. Probably should speed up a little bit. The second way of being involved is by becoming a financial stakeholder. It's a much bigger deal. It means putting down serious amounts of money. So we're looking for large organizations or organizations to take up that kind of challenge, plus, of course, a time commitment. Typically, the sort of level of support we get from most stakeholders in the order of 15 to 20k euros, and per phase, and most projects run over 2 to 3 phases. So what that buys you is the good feeling that you're actually supporting this work, because it's a work which is necessary for the industry as a whole, but also gives you a right to sit on the project steering committee and gives you management oversight of the projects. And I'm pleased to say that Austroads is currently supporting the Common Schema project through that process. So that's the way you can become involved. I want to also talk briefly about another activity of the infrastructure room, which is what we call the Integrated Digital Built Environment Working Group. It's a collaboration between OGC and buildingSMART International. We had a planning meeting in Tokyo. Prior to Tokyo, we had a meeting in Singapore. It's a way of buildingSMART engaging with our colleagues in OGC who are developing the standards for the geospatial sector and looking at how we can bring those two domains together. This activity was kicked off in 2013 and 2016, I should say. And you can see me there, but we were part of that group. And early in 2017, we published a white paper, and that work is progressing. So we had, as I said, we had a meeting in Singapore in September, where we looked at the CityGML IFC integration project that's going on in Singapore at the moment. We had a meeting in during the Tokyo summit. We gave a presentation to the summit, and I also gave a presentation to the Open BIM conference in Japan in the same week. The main activity which is happening there at the moment is around geotechnics. We're having a geotechnics workshop in January again over in Paris, and it's anyone who's available on those dates and wants to register and go to Paris for that, please let me know and I'll make sure you get onto the list, but it's probably a bit short notice. The other thing I want to talk briefly about, and just checking my time here, yes, I need to stop, is another activity which is not quite related to buildingSMART, but I think is important to us, and that's the an ISO work which I'm involved in called ICDD, Information Container for Data Drops. What is it? It's a standard that provides a way to manage and describe links between components or data elements in separate digital representations of the built environment, held in a single bundled repository of data. So for example, you might have a container that contains a CityGML model, various BIM models, associated spreadsheet data, and the protocol allows you to connect all those pieces of information. So you can identify a pier on a bridge in the CityGML model and link it to the corresponding pier on a bridge in a BIM model and link that through to a spreadsheet. So this, how does it work? It would be implemented in software. It uses RDF-OWL to specify the links, but which should be hidden from the regular end user. There are two parts to the standard. The first is just establishes a straightforward multi-model container, as I just described. The second provides added facilities for the user to define their own models. And I can't really explain that anymore at this moment. But it's that standard coming close to being approved. It's gone through the draft international standard voting phase, only released this past week. We had one dissenting country, so there's a couple of issues to be worked through there, but it should proceed fairly quickly. So if you're interested in that, just let me know and I can give you more information. I want to speak quickly about the three things that are going on in the Common Schema project. The first is Geotechnics. That's concerned with the how we represent the geology and the geotechnical qualities or non-qualities of the Earth in the context of these infrastructure projects. I'm not going to say too much about that, but this diagram here, if you can read it, shows how we kind of break down the geotechnical model into its parts. And we believe that in IFC we can represent that information adequately. We are, as I say, having a workshop in Paris early in the new year to really hammer out some of these details, but that work is progressing well. This is just a hint at the way in which it might be organized in stratums and substratum and so on, but I won't go into detail here. The other thing is spatial structure. I could talk about this for endlessly, but we're very familiar with the idea of breaking down a building into site, building story, and spaces. But when you try and overlay those concepts onto IFC, onto infrastructure, I should say, it becomes a bit more complex. And we've been working hard at coming up with a consistent way of describing spatial structure for infrastructure. So again, if you're interested in that, I'm very happy to talk to you. So just get in touch. Finally, IFC extensions for Earthworks. This is the interventions that we make above the geotechnics, the ground, the underground area, and it consists of subgrade, embankments, excavations, cut and fill, slope protection, and subsoil treatment. All of those things are included. And so this is work which is going on at the moment, and we're trying to find a consistent way of describing this kind of process. So that's enough from me.
My name's Ben Harland. I'm with Mott MacDonald and also the Transport for New South Wales Digital Engineering Panel. I had the pleasure of representing Australia's committee on the ISO 19650 work in Tokyo a few weeks ago, where we were mostly discussing parts 3 and 5 of this standard. So I'll give you a very quick update of what's going on there. First off, it's my pleasure to...
Sorry, Ben, can you close your GoToMeeting window? It's appearing on the screen for some reason. Oh, don't close it. Just minimize it. Those two little arrows pointing up.
Yep. Thanks.
Sorry.
So 19650 is broken down into 4 parts, and if you haven't been made aware already, parts 1 and 2 were published quietly at the end of last week. Part 1 covers concepts and principles of information management using building information modeling, and part 2 focuses in specifically on the delivery phase, and it takes you on a step-by-step kind of process flow through all of the activities involved in delivering a project in the construction industry, and it gives you advice and guidance and standard ways of working as you go through that. I'm assuming that most people have probably seen either seen a draft or seen the British standard, which preceded this international standard, which was BS and publicly available specifications 1192. Part 3 is on the operational phase, and part 5 is more broadly describing a security-minded approach to information management using BIM. Both of those are at committee draft stage, and I'll just give you a little update on where we are with them. If I had to try and summarize parts 1 and 2 in 3 steps, this is how I would do it. So they describe broadly the information cycle as it flows through the life cycle of a project, from delivery into operation and back again for any upgrades or maintenance. They cover setting and managing of information requirements, and it defines how a project would work using a common data environment that's controlling the information that the project uses in a systematic way, so that collaboration is clear and concise, and minimizing proliferation of errors. For parts 3 and 5, these are the countries who have been involved so far, and there may be others that I'm not aware of. For parts 1 and 2 of the standard, I'm sure there was a lot more input, but these are the ones who are working on it at the moment. This is Technical Committee for Civil Engineering Works, TC59, and a subcommittee for Organisation of Information about Construction Works. So part 3, as I mentioned, it's with regard to the operation phase, but it extends slightly into the beginning and the end of the delivery phase. And here's a little flow diagram which describes how the whole standard works. So first off, preparing to manage information associated with an asset, and it doesn't just talk about operating the asset, but it also talks about how to set appropriate requirements for the delivery phase to make sure that at the end of the delivery phase, the right information is being provided and integrated with the asset information model. That is the body of knowledge that the asset management team own and operate. So just to break that standard down to 5 basic elements, and this is looking at it slightly from a delivery phase point of view, which is my guess what the majority of people on this call are coming from. So first off, planning for the procurement of an asset and a digital twin or a useful body of information which describes and helps to maintain the asset. Third, and critically, briefing the delivery phase well, and that's something which a lot of people feel that isn't happening particularly well in industry at the moment. So this standard hopefully will help operators and maintainers get involved at the beginning of a delivery phase so that what is delivered is more useful. Talks about incorporating information into the asset information model and how to review an asset and its model well. Part 5 is on security, and there's obviously already ISO 27001 and the rest of the 27000 series. This one is focused on building information modeling, so it's more focused on what we would do in the delivery and operational phases of projects using this. This is how the standard is broken down. There's a sensitivity assessment at the beginning to establish the need for security, and then the standard walks you through a very logical and systematic and not particularly difficult approach at thinking through and applying good information security on a project which is working with building information modeling. This standard will be just very helpful even for someone who's got absolutely no knowledge of this. If someone on the delivery phase or operational phase can just sit down with it and work through it and come up with something which is will apply a good level of security to that information. So again, just 5 things on it. It helps you to establish sensible governance, accountability in the right places, and the processes which would govern information security on the project. It talks through how to weigh up risks associated with models, how to set and manage effective information security requirements, and then simple procedures on to follow on discovery of a breach, or how to put in place a document which people can understand and quickly react accordingly using. And also it's got advice on building security requirements into procurement, and there are good examples in the appendices there for to help people think through where this might need to be applied. Just before I finish, a few names of useful people you probably already know about. Anne Kemp is a convener of the 19650 suite. David Churcher is the author of Part 3, and Alex Luck of Part 5. All 3 of them are from the UK, and they have experience with the PAS 1192 suite of documents from which these have grown. Here in Australia, Neil Greenstreet is the chair of the BD 104 working group, which, part of the Australian Standards Australia committee, which supports this work. So our mirror committee to SC 13 is BD 104, and I'm a member of the working group, and I see there are some other members here, and so we will be making some comments on parts 3 and 5 from this month through to February next year, and then we would expect to see it moving, both of those parts moving fairly quickly towards publication, maybe towards the end of the year or getting on into 2020. There's also some discussion on whether we would be producing an Australian guide or annex to this suite of standards, but nothing there has been agreed yet. That's all from me.
Hi, it's John Merchant here. I'm going to give a little bit of feedback from the summit about particularly community and technical strategy. and particularly some aspects such as the forum and the website. So buildingSMART have recognised that communication is key with the community itself and the wider industry, and so they've been looking at revamping a lot of their online presence. And one of these key parts is an online forum for discussing various aspects of buildingSMART technologies. So if you've got questions about IFC or BCF or the buildingSMART data dictionary or the common schema for the infrastructure improvements to IFC, etc., then this forum is going to be another excellent way of reaching out to a wider community for getting some feedback and answers on questions in these sorts of areas. So the forum is now live. You can sign up and join. It's got various chapters or groups built into it around development and implementation of IFC, as well as the management. There's some opportunity there for setting up Australian chapter room or the various other chapters, or the various rooms such as airport, or the other areas focusing on particular aspects that might be localized or a particular discipline specific. So yeah, this is there's all, yeah, so they've already set up some of these rooms, etc., construction room, infrastructure room, product room, etc., and these relate a lot to the various face-to-face discussion groups that happen at the international summits. And the idea is that this can be a vehicle for carrying on those conversations in between those summits where the face-to-face meetings do happen. The other area that's being revamped, and having been an implementer myself and talking to some other potential implementers, there's a recognition that there needs to be a lot more improvement about the way that IFC and BCF, etc., is explained to various implementers, and the way that they can gather information, examples, etc. So the technical domain of the buildingSMART website is being overhauled, and it's going to have various improvements, including examples and documentation relating to all those technologies that I was talking about before. The classes themselves, the model view definitions or subsets of the IFC releases, the BIM collaboration format, and the buildingSMART data dictionary. And then again, the opportunity for various information and contacts to the different groups that help maintain and implement and support the technologies that buildingSMART are managing. This is also going to include, I guess, a better or more better aggregated or collated version of accessing different versions of the different technologies. So IFC 2x3, or the earlier releases through to IFC 4.1 and IFC 5, etc., as they're released. As I said, this will also include a lot more resources on things like GitHub for developers, where they can access the publications and the versions and use version control there, as well as examples, etc. And so that's, yeah, I guess mainly that on the website. There's also a lot of discussions that I've sat in around the technical strategy and how do we improve IFC, and what are the other areas that we need to work on to make it more useful and more widely and commonly adopted. A very particular topic of interest is management of properties and property sets, so that they can be used commonly across different projects and different regions and industries and internationally. At the moment, there's a series of common property sets which get published when an IFC release is made. But the buildingSMART data dictionary is a vehicle that's also going to be a useful mechanism for one, maintaining and nominating translations of these properties into different languages, but also managing and maintaining actually which properties are common and how they can be commonly used and defined in that. So there's some aspects of the data dictionary, and then some revamping about the way these get published and managed, including the IFC doc tool, which some of you guys might have seen is a software tool for actually defining the schemas and the model view definitions that get used later on. This particular slide shows the buildingSMART data dictionary access through the web portal, where again you can start to search for these concepts and then try and find the descriptions and the translations for these through that mechanism. Finally, I'm going to keep mine brief so we catch up a little bit of time, but there's also, and Jim mentioned this in his presentation, about how do we accelerate the implementation of IFC once a version or a release is published. So part of this is the push to create a common toolkit that might be used. At present, most of the software implementers either license the toolkit or develop their own commonly. And there's certainly a push from a wider group of buildingSMART actually to make a common toolkit which might be used officially endorsed by buildingSMART and managed by buildingSMART potentially, that gets used across a lot of different software implementations, and that hopefully could accelerate the adoption of a new release, rather than implementers have to go away and make all those changes in tandem as they get released. There's also, I guess, the opportunity to more quickly accelerate the exploration and testing of a release before it's actually formally published. So for any software developers that are sitting in the call, there could be the official mainline stream of IFC releases, which has all the, the discrete intervals of releases according to the ISO requirements. But in advance of that, to test some of these features before they get published, there could be some actual stable, some branches that are more agile and quickly published and updated, allowing the software developers to access these things and try them before they're published. I think that's one of the big reasons why IFC4 has been quite slow on the take up, is that a lot of stuff wasn't tested, and then some of these subsequent releases have been addressing some of the issues that have been identified once the actual implementers started testing them. So that's all I quickly wanted to say. If you do want any more details about any of these aspects, then I'll quickly flick back up so you get my email address if you want to query anything further.
I'm a member of the Building Room Steering Committee. The Building Room was one of the first rooms of interest created in buildingSMART, along with technical, and its original role was representing the interest of users who were modelling buildings. That role has become much more diverse, and I'm going to talk about 3 projects which I've had involvement in the third one, but the other 2 I'm just broadcasting what these 2 projects have been doing at the moment. The lead of the LOX project has been James van der Zande from HOK in the US, and supported by Nick Nesbitt. They came together because the LOX terminology has many variants. There's LOD. Was it detail or development? Was it geometry? Was it information? Did it represent accuracy or coordination? Or was it something that was finally suitable? They tested over the period what all these things were. They had quite a significant team of people helping. And was it a question of communication? This is not my area of great knowledge, so but I believe it's, for people in the practical field, this is something that's very important. And it's also a matter of some importance when we're doing model checking. How do we validate a model? How can we make sure that this right combination of detail or geometry or information has been achieved as we go through the life cycles of a building model? The BIM Forum in the US has led a lot of this work with its publications, and the dictionary has helped this stuff. Is LOD development something like this? Again, how's this all resolved? And finally, validating LOD. How do you validate completeness or accuracy? James lent towards the UK suitability code, but they're anxious now to get some final response on this topic. There's a report that's available, and in fact, after this session, we should give you a link to the Tokyo Summit repository of all the presentations, and you can explore all of this material in much more detail. Open questions. Have we got the same coding? That applies here in Australia. Are all of our client groups using the same terminology for the ways that they structure projects? Of course, most clients are not highly articulate in this area, but it's something that we have to focus on. The second element of my presentation is the work called IFC for Site, Landscape and Urban Design. Jeffrey Ouellette, who was a former chair of the Implementers Support Group and was employed by Vectorworks in the UK, in the US, is now the leader of this project and is now working directly for buildingSMART International. The project has been approved in the Standards Committee, so it's part of the process management of buildingSMART International. And you will recall from Jim's opening statement that the Geotechnical project has a close relationship with this proposed project. What are the goals? Well, I think it's a very natural extension of the fact that if we have a building model, we're placing that building model on something, the terrain or the ground. The model setup project looks at how the legal boundary of your property works with the building model, and this takes the whole terrain and site context to a much broader and stronger representation. It overlaps several areas. Urban planning is only emerging. You probably know that Jim Plume and I and David Marchant have been working on precinct modelling, and at the precinct scale of where we're modelling, then this topic is a very important element because it's a big gap in the IFC schema. So here's the legal representation. Geotechnical, how does all this represent? Why do we have to go to multiple government agencies to acquire this data and then find that it's not in a format that we can even use anyway? I think is a very important topic, particularly in the actual landscape pure domain. Norway has done a preliminary proposal for a landscape extension, and so there's a lot of work there. And the British, I think it's British Landscape for BIM working group have also done quite a bit of work on standardising specifications and representations of certain shrubs and bushes and stuff like that. The external artefacts, all of the hard furniture and stuff like that, pavement, have to be covered. And we also need to understand how we integrate drainage, stormwater, all these things. Finally, probably many of you know that AS 4588 has been looking at underground services. So that has a very strong relationship to this work. What's one of the biggest costs to the New South Wales government? Underground services on the Sydney Light Rail. The final project I'll talk about is the model setup. I think many of you have probably been to presentations on it to Built and some of our own local workshops. I'm going to just show you the latest bit of work we've done on a demo. So here's a little site. We want to build on this site. The architect has worked out that he wants to put his building in the building orientation. He wants to rotate the site. So the important thing is that when we come from a map reference, we need to have a strong relationship, which is defined by a helmet 2D transformation. The surveyor sends a new site model to us. This time it's in the right orientation and in the right location. The architect then plays with it, adds his data. Here is the IFC 4 implementation of the data required. Only 2 entities, and the IFC map conversion holds the helmet projection transformation data. So it's a tiny implementation for vendors, but we're not seeing a massive development of that yet. So here's our little test. We've got back the new data and we're able to put it on the site. And this is no fake. This has been done using the proper process, and it shows how we can really get much better accuracy and reliability of the data. Of course, for a single building, this is not so much an important problem, but for infrastructure, it is a particularly big deal. And if we were building a station on a railway line, then you would use this technique to get your local site model of the station, which will be perfectly integrated when it goes back into MapGrid in the master model held by the infrastructure designers. We've had the good fortune to have some strong feedback from New South Wales Government. They have a project going called GDA 2020. Australia has a new geographic datum, which will be established in 2020. Since GDA 94, we've moved 1.8 metres northwest, as the green arrows show. And secondly, and more importantly, I think probably for us in the future, the accuracy of the systems today are just so much better. So with this new technology proposed in GDA 2020, you'll be able to track a mobile phone in the hands of a person. So it means that spatial location from sensors, from other devices, from tracking people and vehicles and goods will be significantly enhanced. On the project itself, we responded to a paper by a Swedish group, and our key supporters of that have just delivered their feedback. We've got to take it forward into the international context. We've had very strong support from Germany. Stefan Marchik was a presenter at the Tokyo Summit. How am I going on time? We were lucky that I was asked to present at the final plenary of the buildingSMART Summit in Tokyo on this topic. So I put the whole MSI project from beginning to end. What have we got to do? We have continuing discussion in ISG. There is a bit of technical work. Is this associated with IFC site or is it IFC project? We have some advisors suggesting that we should be able to store the reference points for the transformation so that they can be quality assured at either end of the process. And we're very close to the final documentation, which I'm now hoping we can get out in 2019. So that's me. Thank you.
Okay, Phil McNeil. I'm here just to talk quickly about the International Open BIM Awards that were held this year, particularly this year and presented in Tokyo. So what we're going to talk about just very quickly is to introduce the awards that for those who aren't aware of them. There is quite a bit to get through on this slide, but I wanted to go through the last half of it, which provides slides for each of the honourable mentions and each of the award winners. But as we're sharing these presentations, you'll be able to follow those through at your leisure. There's also a link which I'll show you on the end of the presentation to the buildingSMART website. So just a bit of a background, the last 4 years, these awards have been run, except for 2015, which was missed for some reason. The last 3 particular have been managed under categories of design, construct, O&M and student research. And you can see the figures there of the growth that these have been having during that time. This year, 53 submissions into 40 different projects. So some submissions covered, or some projects covered multiple categories. Next page, Jim. So just a bit of a breakdown on the projects that were submitted and where they came from. There's stage 1 of the presentation submission process, or the award position submission process, is to basically raise your hand and say what you're submitting about. And of that, you can see the numbers there. France led the way, China, UK quite a bit, Australia put up 2, which was quite good. Next one, Tim. And thankfully, not all of those projects were submitted. So you can see the coloured ones there are the ones that actually went through. So instead of the 9, France put through 4. China dropped back by 1, and Australia dropped back by 1 also. That was kind of helpful because it did reduce our workload quite a bit. Next one, Jim. Just a bit of a statement here from Richard Petrie, the Chief Executive of BuildingSMART International. So the awards were created to recognise exemplary projects using BuildingSMART solutions. They are judged on how effectively, but innovative, to overcome any interoperability challenges. But it's not just about the success stories. I think BuildingSMART is also interested in hearing about areas where they may not have lived up to standard, and that gives great feedback and insight into how things might be improved in the future. Next one, Jim. This is the core team for this year. I should probably say that this year, after the Paris Summit, there was quite a lot of work to restructure and reinvent the awards process. I think that's happened each year since, but this one particularly set up quite a significant management team to look after that. Jim? And the mandate for the management team was to ensure that there's fair and transparent and unbiased awards process. And as that, the management team did not contribute to any judging results. And on top of that as well, as we get into the jury, the next one, these are the people who formed the judging jury from our end of the world. It was myself and Chris Penn. But there's quite a significant uptake in being on the judging panel. Next one, Jim. And obviously there's the other, going back to the fair and transparent. Any juror who had any association with any project on the awards was not allowed to vote on that, or in that category, I should say. So there's a number of jurors by chapter. We had a couple, as we said, but there's quite a lot from Benelux, Poland, Switzerland. Quite a good uptake this year. And next one, Jim. So 30 members from 17 chapters was a pretty good average of almost two each. A bit over almost 2 each, and that's 75% turnout for individuals and 89% turnout for each chapters in the process. Excuse me, I'm reading my notes here, so you can probably turn pages. Next one, Jim. So I mentioned the stage 1 submission, where submitters get the opportunity to say what they've done and how well they did it. But it's not, as it says here, we're not looking for, we are looking for more, whoops, sorry. We are looking for more than that. We want to see what you did, how you did it, and we need to see that in some sort of physical form. So here we are looking at, we're asking people to identify what standards and tools BuildingSMART or other that they've used. From here we have 33, 82% were on IFC 2.3, 52.5 on IFC 4, quite a bit on coordination view, quite a bit on BCF, and surprisingly 30% they use something else which they consider the open bin. Next one. And on top of the standards, we also wanted to know about what BIM users were used on the submissions. 50 total use cases. One submission had 47. They declared that they had used in their project. I think Chris must have reviewed that one because I didn't see it. Thank God. It's a lot of work to get through. 25 on 3D coordination, 20 on visualization, and 15 on quantity takeoff, which is quite good. Next one, Jim. So this is the stage 1 submission form. As you can see on there, we're asking the submitters to identify the project, the contact details and so on, the phase of it, the IFC, BuildingSMART standards or tools or whatever they've used, and also to say something about that. So the description of the use, what benefit they saw, any measures that they took, and an opportunity to say something about that. So for each use that was identified, the submitters had to submit one of these pages, which is done on a spreadsheet. Next one, Jim. And then the jurors take over on stage 2, where we look at the evidence that's been submitted and posted with that stage 1 form. And we do two things. We are judging firstly on the stage 1 claim, and then did they actually follow up with the evidence during stage 2. And having done that, which took us this year about 2 months to get through, we then went into a consensus process where we selected probably the top 6 in each area, and then we discussed what we were going to do about that and which ones we thought as a group should be declared the winners, or at least the honourable mentions. Next one, Jim. Now, I made a little change to my presentation while we're sitting here online. Right now, this frame here was going to say thank you and be the end. So I might get Jim to go right down to the bottom, because what's here is a group of slides that are showing. If we've got time, we can skip through them very quickly if you want, Jim. The following few pages are the winners.
Do I need to keep going? I
keep going. I think we're up for time, so I just wanted to drop down to the last page.
I'm pointing to 2018 Warwick.
No, there's more. There should be. I think you might be pointing to a header. Doesn't matter. You'll get the presentation when it's posted, and on the last page there's just a couple of links there that keep going way down.
Oops.
Oh, missed it. There we go. So those links there are to firstly the buildingSMART awards page on the buildingSMART international website, and also a direct link for that as well if you want to. I also had my email on there, which it doesn't really matter, but if you want, you can get in touch with me through Aaron and know more about the awards process. But definitely, if you can get a chance, grab hold of this presentation and have a quick look at the projects that were submitted and how they rate. But also, buildingSMART is going to issue case studies on the winners, and hopefully some of all the honourable mentions, which will be published in due course as well, and they'll have a lot more detail. Obviously, they have to negotiate that with the submitters themselves. So thank you for your time. That's it for me.
I have a question for Phil. It's Ben Harland here. Phil, was there any, were the metrics gathered, and could they be shared, the measures of success from the projects?
It will come out in use cases, I suspect. I can actually make that inquiry and see if they can be shared, but not all of the metrics were provided, and a lot of people didn't have metrics at all. Obviously, it's very difficult, I guess, to measure certain use cases across the project, and some of the projects weren't actually complete, so they may have been presenting a design phase of a project that was only just going into construction, and some of them also had submitted a project for one example that comes to mind, submitted for construction, but it was actually all the evidence was about design. So it's very hard to, and that's probably something that buildingSMART is going to look at for the next year, the lessons that we've learned through this process, and trying to tie it down so that we actually get the information that we need to provide a more stringent review, I guess, than what we had this year. I guess in a lot of cases, if you're submitting for an award and you don't follow the rules exactly, then you're automatically disqualified. But we didn't want to do that here. We wanted to at least recognise that the effort that had been put in and the intent. So a lot of the review process that we went through was actually looking through what they'd done and trying to make some judgment against, firstly, the statement they made in stage 1 and how actually innovative they were, and whether they may not have actually met the brief, but they did actually do a good job.
Yep. But even if it's not being used
in terms of metrics, Sorry?
then even if it's not being used for judging, but as a useful piece of information for other projects, for business cases and things, then to see a little summary of the metrics in the case studies would be helpful.
I'll take a note and pass it on to Susan. And see
Thanks.
what they're going to do.
Perhaps I could add a comment. Deke Smith gave a presentation to the building room on this, and one of his most important things that he noted was the list of use cases, the BIM uses. And he said this is probably the most valuable resource that they've ever had because it identifies both the priority and the nature of certain BIM uses. So Deke Smith has undertaken to do some analysis and write a report. I can't remember the timetable for that, but you could follow up with him on that topic.
Yeah. Deke did a lot of work in analysing all of those submissions. From that perspective, it also making it a lot easier for us as jurists.